when you're addicted to hate, all you need is a screen with a data connection. And you can literally take in all the hate you can possibly handle through those screens. When a human being is isolating themselves to a screen, when they have binary opinions about the world that don't have any room for nuance, this is probably the prime indicator of all of it.
Hey folks, welcome to the Some Podcast. My name is Mark. Hope you've been enjoying our series of videos with Arno Michaelis so far. This is part 4, and in this episode we're going to talk even more about his journey into and out of the far right.
So I wanted to maybe touch on something that you said way back about tattoos. Mark's a big tattoo guy, and you've mentioned in the book that when you got your first SS tattoos, it wasn't because of any ideological investment. It was just literally a thing that provoked a reaction.
Yeah.
Can you expand on that a wee bit? And when was your first earnest tattoo of that ilk?
So my first SS tattoo, I don't know if you can. This big black blob here is a raven's head. Mm-hmm. It actually looks a lot better in person, but it's obviously a cover up. And underneath that, I had and this is all on my own. I was a big fan of the book. Black Razor was the sword. Michael Moorcock had a thing about like something about chaos. So there's this. That's where the 8-arrow chaos symbol came from. Mm-hmm. So I had a kind of a cross style 8-arrow chaos thing, and then through the bottom of it, it said skins, and the 2 S's on the other side were like SS bolts, and it was homemade and it was very shit quality, but that was my first SS tattoo, and I was, again, like later on, like other skinheads be like, well, that chaos symbol's whack, man, like we're not stupid anarchist punk rockers, and I was like, I like chaos, like that didn't go, like you're not supposed to like chaos if you're a white nationalist. It's not binary enough. Like chaos isn't binary simply, but I had that throughout my skinhead days, and that was the first time I got SS bolts, and I honestly wasn't thinking about anything like about who the SS were, what they did. All I knew is that it shocked people. Same thing as the upside down cross I had. It was like, okay, this will piss them off. That's really all there was to it.
With tattoos, I get that. I've got my hands and stuff tattooed, and people still react kind of negatively to that. Like, even though it's like it's nothing. Do you know what I mean? Like, some people will be like, "Oh, you've made a really poor choice there, mate." You know what I mean? And obviously, you said you've had quite a lot of tattoos, and you've had quite a lot of them covered up as well. So, yeah, I mean, it's a journey, right?
I love it now. It's my hand tattoos are some of my favorite tattoos. But you cross a threshold where you're like, okay, I might as well now. And a lot of people, you'll never get a job. It's like, well, actually, I have my dream job now, and my tattoos help it. Like, it gives me more credibility. So I'm lucky in that way. But when I first started getting tattoos, and they were really shitty homemade ones, I had all kinds of adults coming up to me going like, you're going to feel pretty silly when you're 80 with that tattoo. And I'm like, I ain't going to live to be 21. Like, that was my response to all that.
Yeah. What was your first one with an actual intent? Do you remember that? Do you remember the moment you got one that wasn't just a shock? It was like, this is who I am now.
When I had the swastika on my finger, which is long gone, removed and covered now, that was like it was definitely for the shock, but I was also like, this is the symbol of my people. Like, and if you don't like it, I can show it to you like that, or I can show it to you like this. Like that I definitely I felt at least I tried to tell myself, I felt like this is my ancestry, this is my heritage, which technically it was, but the fact is that the Vikings weren't racist. They slaughtered and enslaved and raped all sorts of other white people, but they had peaceful trade and diplomatic relationships with North Africa and Arabia.
Maybe a good time to actually brush upon the Viking stuff. But I mean, obviously, you're talking about a swastika there on your finger, and that's pretty overt. But the whole kind of like the expanding library of symbols and digits and codes was signaling each other a big part of it. When you were out and about as a skinhead, I guess it was pretty obvious from your look, but was there a kind of a knowing glance exchanged by people that knew, like the 88 or like a more obscure, like a Celtic Cross or something like that? Was that part of the subculture?
It was. I remember the Cash guys all had like hoodies that said 88 on the back. Especially the girls. Like, what's 88? They'd be like, 8 is the 8th letter of the alphabet. Heil Hitler. And I'm like, oh, that's pretty cool. Okay. 88, man. And yeah, so there is, again, it's part of the, it's definitely part of the mystique. And like kind of this, the Elks Lodge handshake kind of sense, like this is our thing.
Yeah.
Not everybody understands it. I could say 1488 to say to my comrades and they know exactly what that means, but like the uninitiated won't know what that means.
It was pretty interesting actually, just to bring Screwdriver back into it, because I believe that when they did that deal in Germany with Rockorama, they basically couldn't sell anything that had swastikas on it. None of those bands could sell anything that had swastikas on it. So they had to be a bit more creative with the logos and the symbols that went on it, which kind of helped give birth to this expanding world of all these other like logos and aesthetics and things. And by their third or their fourth album, Screwdriver get into this Viking territory where you got these kind of Conan. I think actually one of them was a repurposed Conan drawing with these like bare buttocked warrior men standing.
That was for Hail the New Dawn.
Shorelines.
That was for Hail the New Dawn. Yeah, exactly.
But that's suddenly like Ian Stuart Donaldson and a lot of people in that milieu sort of started looking towards Nordic folklore, going back to the Vokish movement, all that kind of Ultima Thule and that kind of world.
Right.
As I've read it in your books, so I kind of want to explore this just for a minute. You were a big Tolkien fan, right? And Tolkien, I mean, we talked about Burzum, right? So Count Grishnak, that's a Tolkien character. Varg Vikernes' his character when he was in, I think it was Mayhem, wasn't it? How did that contribute? Besides the music, I get this is a music podcast, but we can't not ask about how Lord of the Rings became such a totem for the alt-right, and not just Lord of the Rings, like as you say, like Vikings. Even they used to use a lot of the Conan drawings and that kind of world as well. What was that like for you, man?
Well, I growing up, I loved to read, and I could read at an early age, and I'd spent a lot of time in the library, and I was super into Norse myths and Greek myths. And I read every single book I could find in the library on those, and I was always really fascinated with it. I read a lot of fantasy, read Tolkien, I read a lot of Robert E. Howard, so like all the Conan books. I played Dungeons and Dragons when I started that when I was in 6th grade, and I played on through the movement days. In the movement, me and my guys had like epic racist Dungeons and Dragons campaigns based on the Northern Reaches module, which was like the Viking module. So I was always really fascinated with that imagery, and I definitely, and Screwdriver did a great job of selling this, but I bought very much into like, well, if I become part of this movement, I'm the hero in this quest. I'm fighting for my people against these evil hordes. And the Lord of the Rings imagery is very much applicable to the white nationalist worldview. Like in the Lord of the Rings, I think mostly back to the movies, is talking about the imagery, and you'll see all these scenes of Gandalf and everybody running through these hordes of orcs and goblins and just mowing them down, like cutting 10 down at a time, and they're just falling and they keep coming, and at no time do you ever think like, Well, I wonder if that goblin's mother misses him after Gandalf cut him in half. Like, no, goblins don't. They don't have families. They don't have mothers. They're just like inhuman scum enemies that have to be destroyed. There's no other way to deal with goblins and orcs. And I think that gets like projected upon the white nationalist viewpoint, in that they feel the same way about anyone who's not white and or Jews. We forgot to mention earlier when we were talking about Jews, not only are Jews communists and capitalists, but they're also the white supremacist, capitalist, colonizer, apartheid oppressors, as well as the lowest mud race on earth. Like they're all of that all at once. And going back to Tolkien, very much like the all-seeing eye that sees everything, that's manipulating people's destinies and manipulating society. And I don't charge Tolkien with any of that, but it's
no. Well, it's taken from the Edda, is that right?
Yeah, exactly. And going back to Hitler, the swastika was initially a Norse ruin. And interestingly, pretty much every human culture came up with their own version of the swastika, independently or not. I don't know. I love ancient alien stuff, so who knows? You could go down that rabbit hole. But Hitler took the Norse ruin of the swastika, turned it, and then said, okay, that's us. That's the symbol of our folk. That's what's going to represent us from this point forward. And he managed to corrupt the meaning of that symbol to the point where it's literally like toxic to civil society nowadays.
Is there an appeal in the fact that, being so immersed in Dungeons and Dragons and Tolkien and stuff, there's another code there that people can't break? Like, that must foster closeness between the subculture.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like people don't like to feel stupid, but then you feel smart when I know what's up. When I know what's up turns to we know what's up, then it's another level of kind of power over you, creating this mystique that you and your comrades are the lone warriors fighting for a good cause, while everyone else is corrupted by the evil Jews and you're fighting against it. It definitely adds to the mystique when you have a group of people following it as opposed to just a single person.
And maybe because of the mechanics of the internet now, I tend to wonder if there is a similar appeal in the kind of the Marvel universe, the whole kind of like harkening back to gods and icons and destiny and racial purity of, it seems to have an appeal in that, and it's useful because technology now, the pragmatism is that you can get deplatformed for using very oblique references. If you're talking about the Holocaust or the SS, or if you're talking about these things, it's very easy for platforms to tune you out. But right. Combining all those more esoteric symbols with all these examples of more esoteric lore has allowed that stuff to kind of propagate a lot more. Is that something you encounter a lot in your kind of advocacy work and when you're out speaking to people, that this side of things is becoming more pervasive than people literally talking about, David Irving style Holocaust denial?
I think that's definitely a trend nowadays that I don't agree with everything Douglas Murray says, but I'm a fan of his in a number of ways. And one is he brought up the whole David Irving thing, and he said simply like we put this to bed 30 years ago. Why is it all rehashing now? And I think to your point, it's a way for people to feel better about themselves when their life isn't hitting the way it's supposed to, and it's also a way to it's something that people can honestly like capitalize on, and knowing that there's a lot of other people out there that go like, well, I'm just asking a question. I'm not anti-Semitic. I'm just saying, like, how could 6 million Jews have been killed? And it's when you can like bury that under the guise of like, well, Winston Churchill was actually the real bad guy in World War II. And Adolf Hitler wasn't quite so bad. And what about Dresden? And it kind of By the way, Avenge Dresden was a Rahowa song, and that was a big cause of ours back in the day. What about Dresden? And Dresden was certainly a horrific thing. It's nothing to be made light of. And I do think it's a healthy exercise to look inward and say, yeah, even the good guys do really ill shit sometimes. But I think it needs to continue to look inward there instead of being broadcast outward. And to say like, oh, because even the good guys do bad stuff, maybe that means the bad guys aren't so bad, as opposed to what the healthier approach is say like, well, we all have an equal capacity to harm or to heal people. I have a friend, Dwan Colion, who's in Atlanta, Afro-American man, and he works a lot in like environmental justice, and he's also very active in the black church and very into like calling out excesses by some of these pastors who are fleecing poor people to fly around in private jets. And at one point he sent me an article and said, hey, it was about a black pastor doing just that. And he said, Arno, please tell me that Buddhists don't do this, because he knew I was a Buddhist. And I'm like, dude, as I type this, there's Buddhists in Myanmar slaughtering Muslims in the name of the Buddha. Like everybody's shit stinks. Like that, and that's where I think those conversations need to lead, rather than to say like, well, our shit actually, Hitler's shit didn't stink too bad actually. When you look at next to Dresden, like then I think that's when people are really obfuscating truth and obfuscating reality.
It's just presumably, as we get towards the end here, I want to try and leave with some maybe learning outcomes rather than just falling into the trap of being voyeurs. But presumably, like a parent, for example, that you're speaking to, they can pretty readily identify discussion about the Holocaust or something on their kid's desktop or something. But what are some of the more obscure things that you think parents, that maybe you would advise, or that you think parents should be aware of now as being less obvious signs of your kid maybe getting drawn down radical paths?
It's a fine line, because we always want to be really careful not to create a profile. To be like, well, if the kid's doing this, then they're radicalized. Like, because it's not always the case. And second of all, we don't necessarily want to create profiles like that, especially in this age of AI sniffing everything we say and creating profiles on its own. But I think in a broader sense, like this sounds like a bit esoteric, but I really think this is the biggest indicator for radicalization. I was at a conference the NYPD was having on cyber terror, and someone from DHS asked me, how do you know that you're on the right path, or that you're becoming successful in a de-radicalization process? And I just said, I don't know. And I just let it hang there for a minute. And then I went on to explain that, like, anyone who's radicalized is in a very binary world. It's yes or no, good or evil. There's no shades of gray. There's no nuance. Any question you ask them, they're going to have a answer that is dripping with certainty. So when someone who's been radicalized and you've been working with them, when they can get to the point where you can ask them about something and they'll say, you know what, I don't know. I don't have enough information about that to really fall on my sword about anything about it. Like, that's a really positive sign. And so extrapolating from that, I think, and again, this is difficult because part of your teenage experience is you got these hormones raging and there's all this chaos going. So you want to be binary. You want to have like certain definite answers about things, just as the nature of being a teenager. But I think when a kid or anyone else's worldview is like blatantly binary, that's a warning sign. I think it's an occasion to try to introduce some nuance and maybe poke at that binary a little bit. If they're like, well, this is always like that. You're like, really, is it always like that? Is there any exceptions to this rule? Is it possible that there's any exceptions to this rule? And if you can have that discussion and they say, well, yeah, then there are there are exceptions. Yeah, it's possible. Then that's a good sign. If they don't have the capacity for nuance, then I think that's a bad sign. So I think, and it's hard because a lot of these, what I think are clear warning signs, are also just kind of our social condition today. When you got someone who's walking around like with their face buried in a screen everywhere they go, that's a warning sign. And whether they're being radicalized into white nationalism or Candy Crush, the reckoning, it's either way, that screen is taking over their life, and you need to get them off the screen at some point. So prolific screen use is certainly a warning sign, regardless of what those screens are showing them. But I'd also go back to the idea of hate as an addiction, and that I'm an alcoholic. I drank profusely for 20 years. I haven't had a drop in 21 years. So I can speak from experience about what it's like to be addicted to alcohol. When I was addicted to alcohol, I had to go to the liquor store and get my beer, get my liquor. Like, I had to physically obtain that substance and then take it home and drink it. When you're addicted to hate, all you need is a screen with a data connection. Mm. And you can literally take in all the hate you can possibly handle through those screens. So when a human being is isolating themselves to a screen, when they have binary opinions about the world that don't have any room for nuance, this is probably the prime indicator of all of it, any form of anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is absolutely the gateway drug to radicalization. If you have negative opinions on Jewish people for whatever reason, you are now, it's an open wound waiting for the flies of racism to come and lay the maggots of radicalization in that wound. So,
is there anything that you think? Is there anything that have reached you at your most furious when you were young, late teens? Say, is there anything that you now think could have gotten through to you there, or was that some sort of, just mess that you had to burn through to reach those conclusions by yourself?
I think martial arts would have definitely been, and again, this is different for everyone. There's some people where my mother is an amazing artist, and I grew up surrounded by art my whole life, and I was a really great artist as a kid. I used to sell drawings for people's lunch money, and I loved to draw, but everything I drew was like violence. But my mom would take me and my little brother to the zoo when we were wee little kids with sketch pads, and my mom would draw like a beautiful picture of an elephant, and my brother would draw a picture of a tiger, and I would draw the tiger eating the elephant. Like, that was, even though, and I mention this because for some people, art is that diversion. Art can divert someone from going down an unhealthy path. In my case, I just like twisted the art to my neurosis and to my violence and my antisocial behavior and ran with it. But when as a kid, I was like obsessed with martial arts. I loved all the Bruce Lee movies. On Saturday nights, they had a thing called Black Belt Theater, and it was all those old school, like, dubbed Chinese Kung Fu movies, and me and my buddies would watch them, and my friends were all loaded, and they all had furnished basements with, like, pool tables. So on Saturday nights, I'd sleep over there, we watched Black Belt Theater, whack the shit out of each other with the pool sticks. Like, all I wanted to be was Bruce Lee, and all my friends went to Taekwondo and karate because they were loaded, and my parents couldn't afford to send me that. So one summer between 3rd and 4th grade, they had a Judo program through the rec department in the high school gym. And it was pretty cheap. It was like $75 for a 6-week thing. And my parents scraped that together and they sent me there. And I was so stoked, like, just to put on that gi and to be in that situation. And I remember my sensei was a Latina woman who was an Olympic judokan, and she was fairly small. And in this class, there were adults and kids. So there were like guys my size now. And this woman would just be like, kapow! Like just throw them on their ass like it was nothing. And when I was in this woman's presence, up until then, there wasn't an adult in the world who could tell me what to do. But when I was in this woman's presence, I just like stood there like waiting for her order. And I love judo, and I got really good at it. I got my yellow belt and my orange belt, and I was competing in tournaments, and it's all I wanted to do was judo. And then at the end of the 6 weeks, they're like, okay, now it's $75 a week. And my parents were like, yeah, we can't afford that. Sorry. And it actually kind of backfired because now I'm really pissed that I can't stay in judo, but I've had enough judo training to where I'm more dangerous physically than I was before. And even like when I was a street fighter, I would regularly still use those judo moves that I learned when I was a kid. Mm-hmm. But I honestly think that I had the opportunity to get into a really good martial arts program, as a teenager, I think that totally could have diverted me. And it reminds me when Pat got out of prison, he started fighting MMA back in like the UFC 1 days. And he did it for 15 years before he retired. He had a gym, he had a promotion, he managed other fighters. And when he had his gym going, it was in like a rougher part of Madison, Wisconsin. And it was a storefront. So like all these kids on the way home from school would have their faces pressed up to the window, like watching people work out in there. And Pat just organically went out there. He's like, what are you kids looking at? They're like, oh, well, we saw you guys working out. And Pat's like, well, you want to come in and work out with us? And they're like, yeah, that'd be awesome. And he's like, well, come back with your mom and I'll talk to your mom. And he would. And he'd tell mom, he's like, okay, if this kid has all his homework done and he's getting good grades and he's not getting in trouble, he can come work out with us. And he took kids under his wing who like didn't have any kind of father figures. And they got that discipline in Pat's gym. And I know he changed a lot of lives that way. And I think had that happened to me at that age, that would have been a effective diversion.
Wow.
It's interesting though, because I mean, as somebody that also studied martial arts for a long time, I am aware that it can definitely improve all of those, discipline, respect for authority, channeling aggression, striving for self-betterment. But I think there's no getting away from the fact that some of that, you mentioned UFC milieu, is also proven to be quite radicalizing. I mean, I think it was only last week. There was a guy in one of the main events.
Bryce Mitchell got his ass whooped by good Brazilian boy.
Get his ass whooped. Yeah, but I mean, he's out there on record saying that there's not a bad thing happened in the world that didn't happen because of a Jew, and they're still platforming this guy on their card, and
which is
I think
disgusting.
It's pretty clear. Yeah, that world totally has slightly different standards. In that
I agree. And, when I talk about it as a proper diversion, though, I think anyone who's going to be really successful in that field has to be like a legitimate martial artist, like with actually the spiritual background as well as the physical. And that's why Bryce Mitchell got his ass kicked, because he's just a farm kid bully. I know that. Yeah, there's certainly UFC is known for just like breeding a army of meatheads who are just like I don't like the phrase toxic masculinity, but they're literally toxic masculinity poster boys. But when I say martial arts, I mean like a true spiritual application of martial arts, not just the physical. Yeah. Ironically. So me and my guys back in the day, we all chipped in and got a heavy bag, a big like 100-pound heavy bag that we hung in an attic. And we watched Jean-Claude Van Damme's Kickboxer and Bloodsport. And of course, there's always the training montages. Okay, like kick the tree with your shin. And we'd be, okay, well, if we kick this post, we literally just like copy what they saw. It was funny because that's how I learned to breakdance too. Years before, we would like just try to copy the moves that we saw. And so me and my skinhead buddies were like half-ass Muay Thai practitioners. And even without a sensei, if you sit up in an attic and you throw 100 elbows at a heavy bag every afternoon, you're going to get to be able to throw a really devastating elbow. And I did, and I have. So like we were martial artists in that sense, but that was just only in the most shallow physical sense of it. We didn't have any kind of like that's what the difference is to me, is like when you're a true martial artist. Kung Fu was originally like done by Buddhist monks. That was like the first martial art known to humankind, and it was done.
That's what I study. Yeah.
Right. And so it was, it's more spiritual than it is physical. And I think to really excel at martial arts, you gotta take it all in from that aspect. And I think had I done that, instead of just watching Jean-Claude Van Damme videos, the martial arts could have been a diversion for me. As it was, it just, again, made me more dangerous.
It seems like what you're describing, though, could potentially be the worst of both worlds, where they lack the kind of discipline or the spiritual, inverted commas, sort of development, but they're more weaponized as a foe. You know, the people. And I think also, again, not try to like overly generalize, but certainly in the last 5 years, partly because of things like COVID, but there's been a bit of a pipeline with people being radicalized through gyms as well. You know, first into anti-vax stuff, but then the anti-vax websites are also covering other issues. And again, I see that in the circles I was moving in, where one or two of the guys would start talking some pretty unpleasant stuff that would then start to, you know, and these things are kind of comorbidities of those mindsets. Yeah,
I don't disagree with that. It's a high risk, high reward proposition. Mm-hmm. And you're right. If it doesn't go right, the likelihood of it going horribly wrong is very high. But at the same time, it all has to do with what kind of training you have and what kind of sensei you have running the place. So I think when it's done right, it's very powerful. When it's done wrong, it could be dangerous as the other way.
Yeah, so ironically, aggressive young men, in particular, like yourself, could well benefit from a well-sourced, sort of attentive education in something like martial arts or boxing, which is very famous for that, as long as you have paid attention as a parent maybe to the person that's running that gym and assess their character, assess their goals.
I think that's super important. Is it's all about having a good coach or a good sensei. I love to play American football growing up, and I can't catch a cold, but I could tackle people really well, and that was my specialty. But I was just like, the coaches were just kind of your typical meathead high school football coaches, and I didn't really engage with them. And I ended up getting kicked off the team for being caught in the smoking lounge for the 15th time. Back when I was in grade school, they had a lounge where you could smoke cigarettes. So again, but if I would have had a good football coach, not saying these guys were bad, but if I would have had the right football coach, put it that way, who could have like really brought me in and gotten me some. I think when you're successful at sports, it has to be spiritual. Like there is a spiritual aspect to it. And I don't necessarily mean all the guys, thanking Jesus when they win the Super Bowl, but I'm talking about just like looking at your approach day to day as with mindfulness and with intent and with purpose and with discipline, and then coming to really love that process and where it can take you, rather than being like, okay, I just want to cream the quarterback and then I'm going home. I don't want to practice. Like, that's a pain in the ass. Like that's how I was. So I just didn't connect with somebody who could have pointed me in a better direction.
I mean, maybe to try and finish on a positive note, I just want to know, Arno, when you're going around doing this work, when you're speaking to people, I've seen videos of you speaking to groups and stuff, are you increasingly optimistic about the fight against radicalization? Do you see the problem being better addressed? Do you see it worsening? Are there any trends that you're aware of?
The most concerning trend to me, which has really become very prevalent over the past 10 years or so, is this oppressor-oppressed binary that more and more people are seeing the world through. Like, you're an oppressor, you're oppressed. If you're white, you're an oppressor, colonizer, fragile oppressor, and if you're not white, you're oppressed and you're this, and that. Like that.
Yeah.
way of thinking has become all too prevalent in our society on all sorts of levels.
Yeah, the currency of victimhood, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's horrible for everybody all around. I always say, like, to recruit a white nationalist, you first got to convince them they're white, and then you got to make them feel persecuted because of it. Our education system in the United States, at least up until recently, with the best of intentions, has like really pushed that message on kids. You're white and you're a colonizer and you're an oppressor. You're black, you're oppressed, and it's crippling for a kid to be on either end of that. And I get that we need to look at history with openness and honesty, and we haven't been doing that as a society for a long time. But I think it's possible to do that without passing this burden on to our kids, and instead doing it in a reason like, I'm going to liberate these kids from history. Say, this is how it was for hundreds of years. It doesn't have to be like that now if you guys can see each other as unique individuals instead of political abstractions. So that's my biggest concern lately, is this oppressor binary, and not just because of the fallacy of the approach itself, but also because of the reaction that it provokes from other people and other groups, which are inherently all leading to bad places. So I think we really need to like check ourselves and adopt an identity of common humanity as our foundation. And if we can do that, when you have a foundational identity as a human being, then group identities can be okay or even positive. But if these group identities are your first identity, that's when it's a recipe for trouble all around.
Amazing. Well, I think that's probably a really nice note to leave it on, man, because it's something positive as a takeaway. I really like that observation you made regarding the martial arts and the potential for a good role model, coach, sensei, trainer, the impact they can have on kids, maybe like yourself, that just had that overspilling rage that was getting channeled in all the wrong places.
Right.
I hope you enjoyed not having to repeat yourself. I know we kind of went down some old tracks.
I loved it, man. You guys had awesome questions, and this has been a lot of fun. So I'm really grateful you had me on.
I want to consolidate a couple of things for the purposes of the audience. So please go and both read and listen to some of Arno's other stuff. You'll learn a lot more about his journey into the skinhead gangs. You'll also learn a lot more about his journey out of that, because one of the things that got him out of it, which he touched upon, was the rave scene, and he goes into that in a lot of colourful detail in My Life After Hate in particular. That's brilliant. One of the appendices in that is an interview, a really good interview as well, where all of this stuff gets fleshed out. So please, Arno, where can people get hold of these books?
So My Life After Hate is available typically on Amazon, but if you go to mylifeafterhate.com, there's a link there to get it. And The Gift of Our Wounds is available from St. Martin's Press, typically from your standard booksellers. If they don't have it in the shop, they can order it. And then really most importantly, people can find Parents for Peace at parentsforpeace.org with the number 4. And in North America, we have a toll-free nationwide helpline that's also available in Canada as well. And that's at 844-49-PEACE. People with concerns about a radicalized loved one can call that number. And we have a really brilliant intake staff that will help you out and will do all you can.
Fantastic. And just as signing off, Arno, what are you spinning just now? What you're listening to? What music?
I just saw the movie Sinners from Ryan Coogler.
Oh, that's excellent. Yeah, so good.
Really good.
It's so good. And I, like, over the past couple years, I've been really getting into blues. Like, I love, as I said, Rolling Stones are my...
amazing. Yeah.
Rolling Stones are one of my all-time favorite bands. And I read Keith Richards' autobiography, and he's like, we just wanted to do covers of Chicago blues. Like that's all. That was the whole point of the band when we started 80 million years ago, and here we are. So that it was after reading that Keith Richards' autobiography. It's like, well, I got to go check out all these guys that Keith was into, and so of course that led to Muddy Waters and Robert Thomas, and like all the blues legends. I'm really into Freddie King. That's been one of my favorites lately. And so the things I've been listening to just most recently, I have a playlist called Old People Fabulous. That was originally like just like classic rock, but then I'm like, well, like the 80s are old now, so it blew up into this much bigger playlist. But I went out and I got the soundtrack for Sinners, which is just unbelievable. And I put a lot of it on my Old People Fabulous playlist. But the one that really hits me is that just Buddy Guy doing Traveling. And it's just like and if you
tremendous,
you gotta watch like the post credits scene, because that's when it happens.
Yeah.
But
brilliant.
He just does. It's just like a minute long thing, but it's so brilliant. So I'm really getting into blues now. I always have been into blues because all the music comes from there, but now I'm just like going right to the source.
All right, man. Well, I tell you what, we're going to fade this show out on that song for you.
Right on.
All right.
Awesome. I love it.
Much appreciate your time, man. It's been a real pleasure.
It's been awesome.
The work you're doing is fantastic. The books are great. I hope people will follow up and see more of what you've done.
Cheers, guys. This is a lot of fun. Thank you.
Also need to do a little thing at the end for us. Like, share and subscribe wherever you're getting this. Please share it with folk. We want to spread Arno's message far and wide. So just give us a like a share, a subscribe, all of that.
What is it? Unsung Pod? At Unsung Pod, if you want to find us.
At Unsung Pod, every platform, or .net for our website. That's where you can find everything.
We've got Patreon, all that kind of jazz, and we've got hundreds of past episodes. Some of them a bit serious like this, others a bit frivolous. Yeah.
Good to have a mix.
Thanks, everybody.
Ciao.
Yeah, totally. Thanks. Bye.
Cheers.